Hello, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and waterfowls. It's me, Big Mike, and I want to welcome you to the first new episode of Coffee with Big Mike since August. Coffee with Big Mike is the series where I sit down for a chat with some rather interesting and amazing people over a nice cup of coffee. And fam, I did not come back empty-handed. I have a major announcement. I am now affiliated with Poggers, the amazing popsicle-flavored energy drink mix. Poggers is an awesome drink that is designed to keep you focused and going. It comes in two different flavors, Pog Pop and Cream Dream. So if you're looking for that pick-me-up, be sure to give Poggers a go. And if you use the link in the description and the promo code DuckDaddy, you can save 10% and help my channel. That's 2 ducks with 1 stone. Now without further ado, joining me today is LMG, the developer of Aerostrike, somebody I consider to be a good friend. And I just welcome LMG and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi Mike, I'm very glad of being here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. The pleasure is all mine. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
A game developer. I started working on video games around 2017, and that's basically been my job for the past couple of years.
Before we get too far into this, one of my biggest fans, and one of my closest friends, her name is Kit, and per her request, she always liked to know what I'm drinking and what my guests are drinking. So today I'm going to be drinking on a nice cup of Toraja coffee from the island of Sulawesi, Indonesia. Are you drinking on anything today?
Honestly, it's just a glass of water to keep my throat from drying up.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it's late in your part of the world, right?
Yeah, it's 9 p.m. right now.
One of the things I really like to do, and it's been a long time since I've had a game developer guest on the show, so I just want to refresh my audience's memory. One of the things I really like to do with my game developer guests is I want to get to know them, or I like to get to know them as gamers before we jump too far into talking about their work. Because the thing about game developers is that they're first and foremost gamers themselves. And so I want to ask, what was the first game you've ever played?
Ooh, the first game I ever played. I think that might be Super Mario World for the SNES.
I think that is a great choice. That is a great game to start off with. I feel pretty confident my first game was the original Super Mario Bros. For the NES. At the time, my parents owned an NES and they had one of those duo carts that had both Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. And I can't quite be for certain which one exactly it was, but I feel more confident that it was probably Super Mario Bros. So I will say Super Mario World was the first game I ever played for the SNES.
Yeah, I remember back when I was a kid, me and my sister, we used to play the SNES quite a bit. It was that game, and I think later we also got a little game called Zombies Ate My Neighbors.
Oh, I think
quite
I've
a
heard
jump.
of that. Did you have a favorite game for the SNES?
I think it probably ended up being that Super Mario World. We had a couple. We had that one, the Zombies Ate My Neighbors. I believe we also had the Animaniacs video game and Mortal Kombat.
Oh wow! I think that's a very good mix of games. A very, very good mix of games, I'd say. What was the most difficult game you've ever played?
Oh, the most difficult game. That's actually, ironically, a difficult question. It's kind of hard to say, but I honestly want to say that maybe Doom Eternal is somewhere up there, just because of the rhythm the game asks you to take. I'm not used to games that are excessively hectic like that game, and I can get tired eventually. Another one might be probably Guitar Hero, because of certain songs in that game can get really difficult, and there's only so much my hand can handle.
I'm good friends with a lot of real life musicians. And several of them have told me, and they're guitar players, several of them have told me that it's actually more difficult playing that game than it is to play a real guitar. I'm like, oh wow, that's insane just to think about.
Well,
I
I was gonna say that I also play guitar, and I think that part of the issue with Guitar Hero and the real guitar is that in Guitar Hero you usually get thrown right into the whole song, while with a real guitar you will usually slowly learn it over time.
So that might explain it. That might explain that feeling. I'm not such a big fan of rhythm games myself. Or at least I should say the physical rhythm games. Now, normally when I ask this question, the response I normally give to my guests is usually that NES Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games, or I think maybe Ghouls and Goblins, or Ghosts and Goblins, I should say. But now that I think back, after I graduated from high school, about a month or so afterwards, me and some of my friends went to an arcade, and I had played Dance Dance Revolution for the first time. And at that point in time, I was in the best shape of my life. I had played, American football in high school. I did track and field. But man, that game just wore me out. I felt so exhausted after I was finished. And so ever since then, I kind of steer clear of Dance Dance games.
Yeah, I've actually tried one before, and it really kicked me over the curb. I just couldn't handle the amount of physical stress the game puts you through. And it's such a quick pace too.
I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have rhythm at all. You can probably ask my wife that. I have absolutely no rhythm. My wife is really gifted when it comes to music. I'm the opposite of gifted. I couldn't keep a rhythm with a metronome. That's how bad I am.
I'm gonna say that on my end, I'm more or less comfortable with rhythm stuff, though at sometimes when the rhythm gets too fast, it loses me.
In your part of the world, are rhythm games very popular?
I'd say there was a time where stuff like Guitar Hero and Rock Band were pretty popular, but in general, I don't think they're that popular right now. It's mostly just the normal stuff, League of Legends, Fortnite, stuff like that.
When I was in university, and I graduated in 2010, games like Rock Band and Guitar Hero were very popular. Very, very, very popular. But then I was living in the United States then, and so very, I would say a bit different. Here in Southeast Asia, games like Dance Dance Revolution are very, very popular. You'll have arcades that'll have tournaments, and even if people just playing for fun, you'll see a huge crowd of people just gather to watch them play. And it's really something to behold just how into it they get. My hat's really off to them, because I could never get to that level.
Yeah, the skill ceiling on those games is extremely high, and it just seems to keep getting higher each year.
Now, I will have to say, though, it is a great workout. If you're looking for something to get into shape, if you're looking for good cardio, there you go.
Yeah, just be mindful not to miss the step, and then suddenly, oh, there goes my ankle.
Oh, ouch. Whew. There was a time in my life when I was maybe in junior high, maybe early high school, where I could just walk out the door the wrong way and my ankle would hurt. So I don't even want to think about that. Whew. But now, on a less painful note, what are some of your favorite games?
Oh, some of my favorite games. First and foremost, I have to say the Earth Defense Force series. It's just extremely fun. Aside of that, I have to say that maybe Warframe. I used to play it quite a bit, but I've since dropped it. But it's still very fun in my memory overall. And for third, I'm probably gonna say StarCraft. It has very fun memories for me. I played it quite a bit when I was a kid. I don't play much nowadays, but every now and then I just think like, oh man, I kinda miss that game. I should try it out again.
I have heard good things about it. Unfortunately, I've never had the pleasure of playing it. What about that game do you think you like the most?
Let's see. In the order I said, in Earth Defense Force, the game is just extremely fun. Like, it's very satisfying to play. It feels rewarding, and at times the story that is extremely silly just kinda catches me off guard. On Warframe, same. The gameplay is just extremely smooth. It's very fun to play, and I met a lot of great people, so I had a lot of friends to play with at the time. And with StarCraft, it just kinda, I think it was the setting mostly that kinda drew me in this sci-fi universe with all kinds of aliens and artifacts and giant tanks with guns and stuff like that.
For me, I would say probably my favorite game. Probably my top three favorite games would be definitely the first is definitely Sonic 3 and Knuckles, hands down. Number two, it's a bit difficult for me to say, but I probably say any game from the Super Smash Bros. Series could probably fit in number two. And number three, oh, it's a tough one. Number three would probably either be Donkey Kong Country 2 or Pokemon Emerald, I would say. But it's really tough. It's a really tough question, and I'm kind of a dick for asking people this question because it's like almost asking somebody what their favorite child is almost. It's a really difficult question to answer. And
Yeah, it took me a while to pick a couple of them. The only one that I certainly will never take off that list will be Air Defense Force. It's just that much fun. I'm just waiting for the next one to come out.
is there anything you're playing recently?
I've actually been playing Genshin Impact quite a bit lately. The new update where they brought the new area is just extremely good. The whole forest looks amazing. The story is actually surprisingly, how do I put it? It's just really good, really well written. And I also recently tried this game called Everspace 2. I remember playing the original one that was in GOG. And it's a space, the original was a space roguelike game where you just venture out into the wild and try to reach the end. And the second game, they just switched entirely to a more standard space RPG where you progress through a linear story. And it's pretty fun.
Kind of shifting gears a bit. What game do you think was the most influential on you?
Ooh, that's a rough one. Let me think. I probably believe that the most influential was this game called for the N64 called Star Wars Rogue Squadron.
I remember that.
I remember it was first and foremost it was like the first game I personally saw and said I need to buy this, Daddy, please buy this for me, and my parents bought it. And it was also my first experience with a flying game and a sci-fi game, and that just kind of got me into the whole mood for things to come.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, isn't there a cheat code for that game where you can get like a Cadillac? You get like you can fly in like a car. I remember there was a lot of missions in that game, and I really enjoyed that game. Honestly, I rarely did the missions though. I just liked flying around and just shooting and blowing stuff up. I was just gonna say it's probably my favorite. It was probably my favorite game of that era in regards to space or science fiction.
Yeah, it's a really good game, and I think it was probably the first. I don't want to say like it was the first, but it was probably among a group of games that kind of started to use aerial vehicles in consoles, and it did it extremely well. And I wouldn't be surprised if it actually became like a cornerstone for a whole genre of these types of games.
It was really good, and honestly, even I hope I don't get crucified for saying this. And even though I consider myself to be a Nintendo fanboy, I definitely think it was much better than Star Fox 64. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Please don't crucify me in the comments. Well, I think when it comes to gameplay, I think it was better. And the voice acting, I did enjoy the voice acting of Star Fox 64. But
Well, there are two different games entirely. Like Star Fox is more let's say a rail shooter, and the fact that you can actually pick your adventure, you can choose which planet to go next. While in Star Wars, it's more about the actual dogfighting in the air and completing each mission in a more linear fashion and doing it efficiently enough to get a higher ranking.
in that game, did you have a favorite vehicle to fly as?
The Y-wing, the bomber, is just extremely fun, and it made me realize that I really like blowing stuff up.
Oh, me too. That was my favorite as well. Honestly, that's one of the things I really just loved about the N64 games. At that time, I had played GoldenEye, Mission Impossible, and rarely did I ever actually do the missions, but I just love going around blowing stuff up. And I really hope that does not get taken out of context. Was there ever a game that you played that made you want to become a game developer?
That's a really tough one. And the thing is that I've always kind of, since I was little, I just like to draw random stuff on pieces of paper and just kind of imagine a little bit of a story going on. And that just ended up naturally evolving into me liking creating stuff and eventually me wanting to get into game development. But as for a game that just made me go, okay, I need to make something like this, honestly, it was probably that Star Wars Rogue Squadron again. That game is just extremely ingrained in my memory.
I had a very similar experience early on in my life as well. I used to love to draw. And probably one of my biggest regrets in my life is that I probably gave up drawing probably too soon. I gave it up to focus on my writing, and probably not the best idea. But I was very similar. I could draw a picture, and off the top of my head, I could think of stories just to fit this picture. I ended up wanting to be an animator or a cartoonist. Later on in life, as I got older and technology became more accessible, I kind of played around with the idea of getting into some game dev myself. I couldn't really pinpoint a specific game, but I would probably say one really big one was probably DDLC, because it really made me want to make a visual novel. I find game development to be a very, very interesting art form, and one that if you know what you're doing, you can almost do anything. You can almost do anything. You can tell almost any type of story, and with some creativity and maybe some small adjustments here and there, there's really nothing off the table. And that's especially true for indie games, I find.
Yep, that's pretty much how it goes. With video games, like I usually tell this to people, that a game dev can use basically any knowledge you give them. It can be from something as simple as how to water a plant to rocket physics. Everything can go into a video game.
And you can literally have games about anything, like literally anything. I mean, just look at Goat Simulator or Stray or Untitled Goose Game, or there's even there are even games about the most ordinary stuff, like there's several types of coffee games out now where you open and you run a coffee cafe, and you have to take care of it, make sure your customers are happy and stuff, and blend your coffee and choose which ingredients you want to use. And so I think really anything is possible here.
On that note, I want to ask you a question. What game have you seen or played that made you go, wait, you can actually make a game about this?
That's a really fantastic question. That is a great question. I want to say it was 2019, 2020, maybe 2021, somewhere in there. It's at the Sage that year. The Sonic Amateur Game Expo that year. Somebody made a game, I think it's called Mr. Triangle Mania. And the whole game is about, characters, but they're just shapes. Triangle, circle, and I think a square. And they each have like special powers and such. And that really, for me, such a shape, seeing just like a plain shape in such a context was something that really stands out. Now, something more mundane, I would say. Something more mundane. Okay. I can't believe I almost forgot about this one. So it's called Chair Racing Simulator. I just played it back last of August. It was at the Indie Racers Festival, and essentially, you can choose I think it's like 7 or 8 different characters, a couple kids, a couple adults, and you choose a couple tracks, which are all their homes or offices or what have you. And essentially, each of the characters are on a chair with wheels or an office chair, and you race in that. And for me, I found it to be quite genius, because that's something many people when they were younger have done. I know me and my friends, or me and my younger brothers and sisters or cousins, we used to race and stuff like that. Probably what's even more amazing is the art style. It's done in like an RPG. It's made with RPG, type of assets, like the characters, the levels. It's really interesting. And right now, I think it's just in a demo, if I'm not mistaken, but I might be wrong about that. But it's a great game. I would highly recommend checking it out.
And this reminds me of the good old days of Flash games. the little games that you will play in your browser.
What was your favorite Flash game?
Oh, that's a really good one. I remember being very fond of the little sniper games where you basically were like a stickman assassin having to take down certain marks and you aim with your mouse. I forgot exactly the name of the series I really played, but I remember playing through various entries of it, and then I remember playing the last entry. And the final mission, the company that kind of hired you basically turns against you and tries to take you down, and you fight them back. And I remember specifically the final mission that was called Crackshot, where the main character was kind of crippled, he couldn't aim well, and you had to take down like the assassin they sent after you while your hand is shaking and your cursor is going all over the place. It was probably one of the most surprisingly, how do you say this, immersive moments for me, where I was just completely into the story at that point and was just trying to get that final shot in.
It does sound familiar. It does sound very familiar. When I was younger, when I was in high school in computer class, when the teacher wasn't around, we used to play a lot of Newground games. Or games on Newground, I should say. A couple there I remember. One was called, I want to say it was called Goth Maid Girlfriend or Maid Goth Girlfriend, something of that nature. And it was an interesting experience, the teenage Mike. But probably the more serious one would probably be Super Smash Flash. I'm not sure if you ever heard of that.
I'm not sure either.
It was a fan game, but it came out in between the release of Melee and Brawl in the Super Smash Bros. Series. And what was really cool is that it had all of these third-party characters. And this was back before Sonic was announced for Brawl. And so it was a really interesting game. The controls were really sloppy. Well, I wouldn't say sloppy, but they were really slippery. And so it was kind of hard to control, because you had to use a keyboard, and at the time, I'm more of a controller gamer. I like using game pads and such, and so at the time, it was a little bit hard to control, but it was a fun game. It was really fun. But I guess I want to ask, what's the most unique game you think you've ever seen or ever played?
I think one of those might be a little flash game called, what was it? This is the only level, where the whole premise is that it is just one level with multiple stages, and each stage changes something in the actual level. Like, you have one stage where you just press the button, the door opens and you leave. Then there's another stage where you instead have to not press the button and just go straight to the door. I remember there was a special stage where you had to go back to the main menu, and in the main menu there was a button, and there was also your character, and then you just through instinct just press the arrow keys and the character actually moves, and you press the button, then you go back into the level and the door is open.
I would say that does sound like quite a unique game. That does sound like quite a unique experience.
Yeah, it's probably the Flash game that I remember the most now that I think about it. It got, I think, a sequel that was also really good. Just the fact of the things that they pulled off that I just didn't even know you could program with Flash. Like having your left click suddenly have an option to open the door, or refreshing the page and the door is open, or checking the credits and in the credits there's actually a button. It's just crazy stuff all over.
And I really love when I find it in games. I love when I find like Easter eggs, little hidden things like that in the game, because it really shows me when I see stuff like that the game developer or developers really put a lot of thought and effort and care and love into their game. So I think it's really cool. Also, I think once you find one thing like that in the game, you can't really rest, because you're going to be like, oh, wait a minute, is there something else like that maybe I overlooked? And so I think that can add a lot of replayability to a game as well.
Yeah, the little magic touch.
In regard to the most unique game, I probably would have to say, well, I'm not even sure if we can. Well, it's definitely a game, I would say, but I'll probably better describe it as an experience. So there is an indie game called The Immaculate Drag, and it's about a smoker's last night smoking. And the story is told over one night. Not a very long game, just about 45 minutes. And you interact with different players, and you really learn about their backstories and stuff. And it's kind of just about life. It's really hard to talk about. It's a really hard game to talk about. It's a bit like, if you're familiar with Seinfeld, there was a comedy from the 90s, Seinfeld. It was described as the show about nothing. I would say this game is kind of like a more serious version of that, but about nothing in a good way, not nothing as if it's not an enjoyable experience or it's boring or anything like that. But definitely, it's a very heavy game, though, if it's something you ever want to look into. Now,
sounds like a very introspective game.
I would say very introspective indeed. Very, very introspective. And because there's a lot of discussions about life, about literature, philosophy, and, just the presentation, the aesthetics that's used. If you love chill hop or lo-fi hip hop, it'll probably be a good game to experience as well. Speaking of indie games, I want to kind of shift gears a bit and talk more about game development. How did you get into game development?
That's actually an easy answer. I said I played StarCraft originally, and in StarCraft you have a little option to create custom maps. And one day I was just kind of bored with playing just the normal maps and decided, let's try building a map. And I just built a random map, placed a bunch of resources everywhere, and just go ham. Later on, I started to play a little bit with that idea, trying different things, putting certain objects in different places, and eventually I started building little custom minigame I used to call Survivor Zerg, where you basically had to survive against a huge amount of enemies with just a couple soldiers. And I ended up developing that mod through various iterations over the course of, oh god, was it like 8 years maybe? I eventually ended up creating a new version in StarCraft 2 called Survivor Zerg Rebirth, I think it was. And later on I made another one called Survivor Zerg Evolution and kept on building it and playing it with different people, and everyone seemed to like it quite a bit, and it kinda gave me the basic skill set and mindset to start developing games fully.
I think that's really cool. I love when I hear that game developers, they come from like a fan gaming background, or background in which they make mods or fan games or alterations to official games, I guess I should say. So I really enjoy that, actually, because I feel like it starts off as like a passion project, and from that passion project you learn so much, and you can use that own knowledge, that own experience to create your own unique stuff in the future. And that sounds like what you've done over the course of your career.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it went. Around the time I was doing Survivor Zerg Rebirth, I also went to college, and I was studying programming and stuff, and I was like, wait, this looks a lot like the stuff I used to do in StarCraft 2. Is it like very similar? And it turns out that yes, it's actually the same.
My earliest interest in game development probably comes from something very similar. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, Mugen?
I think I've heard it.
It's like a fighting game engine, and so people make characters, and they you add it to this fighting game. A lot of people like to either rip characters from official games or make characters based off of IPs. Like if you ever seen like a fighting game with Homer Simpson versus Peter Griffin, or two very wildly different characters, like maybe Fred Flintstone versus Sub-Zero, for example. It's probably Mugen that you've seen. My initial interest was making stages for that game, and probably nowhere near as complicated as making that game for StarCraft that you were telling me about. But I started with that. Very simple to make. All you need is just like a digital picture. You can either make it in your, a program like a Microsoft Paint, or you can use like a digital photo. I started because it intersected rather nicely with my amateur photography hobby, and from there I kind of grew to kind of want to make my own game. I would say, and but eventually I kind of hit a lot of limitations with the Mugen engine, and one thing kind of led to another, and eventually I became interested in visual novels. So I found it quite interesting when you told me you had, you kind of had that origin, the origin of your game development. Started with, StarCraft. Aerostrike isn't your only game, but you also have at least two earlier ones, right?
Yes, I have one other full game and a couple other projects I made on various game jams. Are you aware what a game jam is, right?
I'm familiar with it, but can you tell our audience about it?
Okay, so a game jam is basically like a little challenge that where you're supposed to build a game in a couple of days or a couple of weeks based off a specific topic, and the whole purpose is to basically mindstorm a game in a relatively short amount of time, maybe meet a couple people, network with them, and just try to have fun and kind of get a brief experience of what it feels like to build a game. You don't have to specifically be the one coding, you can maybe make music, you can make voice acting and other stuff. So I participated in various local game jams and we made several projects. One never saw the light of day. It was like a little Zelda-like RPG where you just went on an adventure, but due to time constraints we didn't get much done. Um, the second one was a game called Trash in Space, where you basically fly around in space with a little spaceship, shooting down enemies and collecting various pieces, which you can then recycle and build new weapons. And you can also disassemble weapons and reuse them to create new stuff. And the third game from a game jam that was the most recent is called Goldbash, where you're basically inside a gold mine trying to keep a bunch of mole people from tearing it down. And for my full game, instead of Aerostrike, I have Attrition, which is a turn-based strategy game with randomized movement.
What was it like working on Goldbash?
It was actually... I was expecting it to be a little bit more complicated than it ended up being, but it's because of a couple of things. Originally, we were going to build the game on Unity. It was the first time I was going to try Unity. I was like, sure, let's try something new. And we had a team of 4 people, if I remember correctly. However, the second day, one of them bailed out and couldn't come, so we were left with 2 people. I was the only one that could code, so I decided to instead go back to the engine I always use, GameMaker, and work it from there. The other 2 people were in charge of creating the concept and making the art of the game. And they were overall pretty competent, I say. They got the art done in time. We got the concept going pretty quickly as well, and we ended up building it up pretty smoothly overall. We were the first team to actually finish, and we finished the game completely. I even got time to add a little main menu, which is something if you're constrained by time, you will usually cut out from a game jam because it's not immediately necessary. But it came out pretty well. People played it quite a bit. We ended up having a couple people just trying to outbeat each other from this high score, and everyone had pretty good fun overall.
Attrition seems like a much more complex game than Goldbash. So how would you describe the difference between making a game like Goldbash and one like Attrition?
I'd say it's basically the difference between drawing a car on a piece of paper and actually building a functional car. Attrition is just on a whole different level in terms of scale and scope. Probably a little bit more than I originally thought it was. I actually worked with that one with a friend of mine who focused on doing the graphics and helped me out in one specific music track. And I think the biggest thing that I did not take into account was how difficult it could be to program an AI for a strategy game versus something like an action game. In an action game, you will usually just let the AI do its stuff, like chase Mario around. But when you're talking about a strategy game, the AI has to think a little bit about what it wants to do and decide upon it. And the complexity scales really quickly in that.
How does developing a game jam how does developing a game jam game differ from developing a non-game jam game?
Well, in a game jam, the biggest problem you have is time, because you have to take into account how much time everything's going to take to develop. And when you're talking about a game, everything is going to take longer than you think. So you have to first get an idea, quick idea, something basic, then start to trim it down to something that seems a little bit more plausible, and then trim it down about halfway until you have something that you know you can make for sure in the time frame you have available. And you have to work extremely quickly to get things done. You have to know whose strengths are, who has what strength, who knows how to code, who knows how to draw, who might be able to know how to draw enough. If you want to add a couple sounds, who might have sounds available or knows where to get them. And you also have to be very good at working together as a team to avoid any trouble. Because if two people don't get along, it can cause issues very quickly. I saw that a couple times. And it also kind of lets you at the same time relax a little bit, since you're not, this is just a quick project. You don't have to take it too seriously, so you can just relax and start going wild, adding whatever you want.
I've been to a couple game jams before, and I can definitely tell that, on the one hand, because of the time constraints, it does seem like, it would be kind of hectic. But on the other hand, when you actually play the games, it looked like something people actually have a lot of fun making. A lot of times, though, don't get me wrong, you can find some very serious games there, and there's some really good games. And some of my favorite games have actually originated as game jam games. But a lot of times, you can tell that the creators, the developers, they just went in having a good time. A lot of games don't often take themselves very seriously at game jams. You can see jokes at themselves, inside jokes, or I guess maybe we could say meta jokes. And I really appreciate that. I really enjoy it when whatever I'm watching or enjoying or playing, the people who made it had a good time doing that. I have to ask you this now. Let me apologize ahead of time, because this might come off as a difficult question.
Oh boy.
No, indie game developers are some of the most hardworking people, and unfortunately, in the world of game development, they don't always get the appreciation they deserve. Many people sink an unthinkable amount of time, money, effort, and so much more into developing games, and unfortunately, many never see a return. So I want to ask, being that you've made so many games before Aerostrike, what keeps you coming back?
That's a really good question. I think it's just the idea of creating something that people can enjoy. I've been lucky enough to actually take a couple of my games to several local conventions and basically putting a computer out so people can play it. And there's not a lot of feelings that really equate to just watching someone start playing something and then just seeing their face just quickly turn into a great smile as they just start having fun playing something you made. And at one time I actually had a very cool moment where I had someone actually want to take the picture with me from how much they enjoyed a game I made. I think it was Attrition at the time. It's just a really good experience overall.
As a content creator, I come from a very similar background. Content creators are often in the same boat, I would say. And in a very similar situation, sometimes content creators get discouraged because they don't see quick returns. But for somebody like myself, if I get one comment on one of my videos and say, okay, I really enjoy this, or what, I thank you for including, people like me in your content, or something of that nature, that really makes my day. And So I really agree. I really agree with your view on this situation. And I can't. I don't have the exact same experience. As a content creator, but I have a very similar experience, and I can definitely appreciate your point of view here. Now I just want to jump in. I want to jump into the main subject, the reason why we're all here today, the real meat and potatoes of this conversation, and that's Aerostrike. So I have to ask, what was the inspiration for Aerostrike?
This was actually a very funny story. So, as a kid, I was very crazy with playing with different kind of toys, and I had a bunch of little tiny toy guns lying around. And then I suddenly realized, like, hey, if you turn this thing around, it kind of looks like a spaceship. And then I will just clear my table and lay a couple of things, like kind of like creating a little map, and then just fly the little spaceship around and have them shooting at each other, stuff like that. And that is actually the inspiration for Aerostrike. It was me just being like, hey, this is actually kind of fun. Can we maybe do something with this in the future? And I did.
I wasn't really expecting that, actually. I was not really expecting that. Usually when I ask my game dev guests here, they'll tell me, oh, well, I played this game, or, I was really moved by that game, or I saw this movie or this anime. But wow, that's actually probably one of the most unique answers I've ever received for this question, I would say.
Yeah, it's very funny for me to tell it because people just don't expect me to just go like, yeah, just turn around the little toy gun and play around with it. It was like, hey, this can be a video game, and bam, video game.
And I think it's something a lot of people can relate to. A lot of people they play interesting games with their toys as a child, but I don't think many people really look to that for inspiration. So I would say that's a really great example of how inspiration can come from anywhere, I would say. What was the development process like for Aerostrike?
If I remember correctly, I started working with Aerostrike back in 2019, right before the whole pandemic stuff hit. I had already experience with making attrition, so I was a little bit more confident in my game development skills. I had because I actually played with stuff like this before, I had a really good idea of what I wanted to make and how I wanted to make it. And the process was fairly smooth in general. I think the biggest hurdles I had were more along the lines of technical stuff, like, okay, I want to make this spaceship fly, how do I actually make it fly? Instead of me actually trying to come up with the idea of the game itself.
In a game like Aerostrike, how difficult was it to get your spaceship to fly?
Thanks to how the physics work in the game engine I used in Game Maker, it's actually not that hard. The big part is the perspective, basically. You have when you're talking about 2D games, you have two dimensions. You usually see them horizontally and vertically. And some games are, like, for example, the old Legend of Zelda games, they're from a top-down perspective, where you see stuff from the sky, and you move horizontally. And then you have stuff like the original Super Mario Bros., where you are seeing things from the side, where the character moves from left to right and jumps up and down. In terms of Aerostrike, it was easy to make a spaceship fly by simply using that side-scrolling perspective, where you move up and down, left and right. The main difference is that you're not tied by gravity. Let's say in this case, if the spaceship jumps, it stays up in the air, it doesn't fall down. So you simply have the controls to move up, move down, move left and right, and when you stop moving, you stay in place. And congratulations, you're flying.
There are many things I really love about Aerostrike. But what would you think, what do you think you love the most about it?
What I love the most about it? I think it's honestly like the actual feeling of the combat, because when I was making the artificial intelligence for the game, I realized I had a couple of options available. One was to have the enemy always know where you are and always chase you around relentlessly. And they always knew exactly your position, they will always move perfectly to chase you around. And the other option was something that I kind of borrowed from stealth games, specifically looking at stuff like Assassin's Creed, where the enemy knows where you are when they see you, and when you go behind the wall, they know where they last saw you, and they will go there. But if you moved elsewhere, they wouldn't see you anymore, and they had to keep on looking for you, kind of creating like this little cat and mouse game. And I decided to make things a little bit interesting by applying that to the basic combat system, where you basically kind of have to try to outsmart the enemy as well as outgun them. And it creates interesting scenarios where you can fool the enemy to go into one corner and then just blast them with a rocket to the face.
And I gotta say, honestly, that's one of the things I personally love about Aerostrike. I just love the amount of tactical gameplay that's involved with it. Now, when I first saw this game and before I played it for the first time, I thought it was just gonna be like a shoot 'em up, like your normal shoot 'em up game. You fly for a certain area and then you shoot. You shoot people, enemies are shooting at you. So I was pleasantly surprised when I played this for the first time. I would definitely really say that it's actually changed the way I look at games like this. I'm more of, when I play Aerostrike, I'm more of a guy. I try to hide around the corner, take a couple shots, go back around the corner, take a couple more shots whenever I can, until I pick the enemy off one by one. I wanna ask. I personally have never seen another game like this, in that regards. Have you ever came across a similar one?
Not so much similar one as much as other games that have similar ideas but used differently. Like I said, I used the whole thing about the enemy seeing you and trying to chase you down, but you be able to just outsmart them is stuff that comes from stealth games, where they have an idea where you are but not completely at all times. And also from top-down shooters I used to play in flash games, where you could use certain corners to kind of outflank the enemy or kind of chase them around. But they usually use the first type of AI I mentioned, where they always know where you are, so they chase you relentlessly. So I haven't really come across a game that combines the two. I'm not sure if there is. There probably is, but at the top of my head, I don't remember seeing one.
Like I said previously, there are many things I love about this game, and the music is another absolutely amazing aspect. This is one of those games where I feel like the music just adds to the intensity of the gameplay. But also, I feel like the music could probably stand alone on its own and something you would enjoy listening to outside the game. So, can I ask, did you make the music yourself?
Yes, I actually composed the music myself.
Oh, wow.
I used a little program called Beatbox, which is a web browser step sequencer, where you basically draw in a grid the notes you want to play, how long you want to play them, select an instrument, and just start drawing music, basically.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. My hat is off to you. My hat is really off to you. I mean, you're just like multi-talented, man. I mean, like, some people. Well, let me just say, as I mentioned earlier about the rhythm games, I have no rhythm, and unfortunately, I'm one of the most ungifted people you'd ever meet in regards to music. So, but I have a great deal of respect for anybody that can make music and make good music.
Thank you. One of the things that I remember wanting to do with the music is that, well, back when I made Attrition, there were 3 factions in the game, so I wanted to make like each music sound different. Basically a music based off the faction. And each music kind of had like a little bit of story. So with Aerostrike, I kind of adopted that same mentality to a degree, where each song kind of has a story or a theme behind it. For example, the first song of the game, that's also the theme song, I ended up making a song that I wanted kind of to feel like uplifting, but at the same time feel like a little bit of challenge to it, like Like it's the beginning to a big fight or something like that. All the songs in the game basically have something like that. There's a song that's based off the beating of a heart, and it's also tied to a character who's modeled after the deadly scene of Lust, if I remember correctly. There's also an upbeat song for a area where you're gonna end up fighting a character that flies a very fast ship. And there's one more song that is actually kind of based off the Mission Impossible theme to a degree, that I thought it would be like a good music theme for a more challenging area.
Do you have a particular favorite song in the game?
Particularly favorite song. I'm not 100% sure on this one, but I believe it will be the song of Area 3, the main base. It's the one that has the blue background. I remember writing the song for it, and it usually had a normal beat. But then I realized that, hey, the drum kinda has a little bit of interesting sound if I remove a certain beat from one point and put it later. And then it kinda creates a moment where the music takes like a different shape for a second, because one drum beat is not where you will expect it to be. It comes a little bit later. And it just feels a little bit more, how do I say it, varied because of it.
Is there anything you wish you could have changed about Aerostrike, or something you wish you would have done differently?
Something I wish I would have done differently, I think it will be keeping some of the ideas I originally had, but decided to cut them out because I thought it was gonna overbloat the game. And then later on, people actually told me, hey, it would be kinda cool if you actually added that. One of them is the little dialogues of the enemies. During combat, enemies may say a couple of things, like they're trying to chase you around, or they're mad because you shut them down. And I was originally going to add that to the game, but because of time constraints and because I thought it was going to be a little bit over the top, I decided to cut it out. Later on, when I showed the game to a friend, they kind of told me like the combat feels nice, but it's kind of missing something. Like I don't really see the enemies as more than just basically AI chasing me around. That it would be kind of cool if they had a little bit more personality. And that's when I told them that I had this idea of the enemies saying different stuff when you were fighting. Something that I actually borrowed from Earth Defense Force, where your allies will often shout different things in combat. And they thought it was a really good idea to make the combat feel more alive, and I ended up including it. And after talking to several people, everyone seems to actually really enjoy the little quips these enemies say during battle.
Now, if you don't mind me asking, this might be another reflective question, but let's say you had a chance to start all over again, and then this time, instead of going at it as a solo developer, you could have a team to help you. Would you choose to have a team, or would you still choose to go alone?
And that's a difficult question. Mainly because I'm not a big fan of this whole, if you could do it again, how would you do it? Because I kind of feel like if I change a little thing, it won't come out how it came out right now. It will probably change something that is actually really critical for the development of the game or of myself as a game developer. However, if I had the chance of, say, make another game, a sequel to Aerostrike, I would certainly like to have a team. While doing everything alone gives me a lot of freedom, it also gives me a lot of anxiety in the long run. There's a lot of things you have to take care of. So yeah, I think it would be really good to have a team to, even if it's just someone to help you test things, it will really be helpful.
I have a very similar view when it comes to such questions about changing the past. I feel like I am who I am, or I am where I'm at today as a result of, certain conditions in the past being specifically as they are. So I get a little paranoid, like, oh wow, if I was to go back and change this, then maybe I wouldn't be here today, or I wouldn't be the person I am today. Kind of like, if you could travel back millions of years ago and you accidentally killed a butterfly, for example, or stepped on an ant, the changes that could cause, the ripples that could cause throughout time, could vastly alter the future. But I could definitely see where you're coming from in regards to, having a team to work on a sequel, because, developing a game like this has to be a heavy load. And the amount of time you put into this, it definitely shows, and I can definitely tell it was no easy feat. to pull something like this off. Now, speaking of
Yeah, it
which,
was.
sorry, please continue.
I was gonna say that the whole game took about 2.5 years to develop in total, and it actually came quicker than attrition because I already have experience on game maker. So rather than having to figure out how to do stuff, I just did it this time around.
Are there any challenges that you've had to face as a solo indie developer that maybe, bigger AAA games or maybe even larger indie games with teams don't have to face?
There's probably several that I can't think of right now, but I think the biggest challenge might be how difficult it is to actually get your game noticed, because a big company only has to make a Twitter post and it'll immediately get a million views. Someone like EA can say, hello, we're making a game, and then it immediately goes into trending. Versus indie games that usually have to start from scratch with very limited public, if any. They have to kind of start to reach out to several people, see if they're interested, get them interested, and actually kind of create a community by themselves, effectively.
Again, we come, you and I, we come from, different backgrounds. You're a game developer, I'm a content creator, but many of the struggles we go through are very similar. As both content creators and indie game developers, there are so many roles we have to juggle. Oftentimes I describe, being a content creator as being a juggler. We have to work on our content, we have to edit, we have to network, and we have to promote ourselves on social media. So how do you go about getting all of this done? Do you have any advice you could give for somebody that's maybe a content creator or maybe a game developer who's maybe struggling with doing all these things, and especially with social media?
The first and foremost, I would say it's a learning experience. Like, I'm still trying to learn how to do all this stuff, so if you feel lost, don't worry, we all feel lost. And I would certainly say, like, don't be afraid to show people stuff. Like, if you just made a game and you want to start working as a game developer full time, just reach out to people. Like, make a couple of free keys, just hand them out to people so they can play the game. If they like it, then you can start working off that. If they don't like it, you can use the feedback to make something a little bit better. Just talk to people, spread the game around, show them your game, let them play it, let them share it, and try to get people to play your game, I'd say.
I just want to add, again, I'm not an indie game developer, but I have a very close relationship with the indie game dev community. I just want to say that, if you're thinking about making a game, by all means go for it, and be sure to share it with the indie game dev community. Ask them for advice. You will find, and I'm willing to, bet anything on this. You will not find a more uplifting community than the indie game dev community. I've never seen a more positive community online in my entire online life. I remember the first time I saw somebody post their game. I want to say it was Sage 2021. An indie game developer posted their game, and it was their first game. It was a good game, but you could tell obviously it was somebody's first game. And they posted about it on Twitter. And having been around the internet for so long, I immediately start to think, this isn't going to be good. The comment section isn't going to be a good experience. I go and I read, the replies to this tweet, and so much positivity there, man. Absolutely so much positivity. So if you're on the edge and you're thinking about sharing your game, or, sharing your game with the world for the first time, by all means, feel free to share it with the indie game dev community. You will not find a more positive community out there.
Yeah, we've all been through the same struggles overall. We've all tried to send the game to a game company and they turn us down. We've all have tried to reach out to people to play the game. We've all had negative feedback. We've all had our haters. We've all been afraid of actually showing the game and being worried if someone's gonna like it or not. We all have experienced that. We all understand how everyone feels about this.
Now, it's interesting that you bring that up, because actually I want to ask you, what is the future of Aerostrike?
Right now, I've been looking to hopefully find a video game publisher that will help me get the game into Steam, help me with marketing primarily. And that's probably the next big step I want to take. Get the game into to a bigger audience, basically. And also, I want to hopefully be able to um, get gamepad controls working for the game. The biggest problem with that is that I don't personally own a gamepad, so I have to actually get one to start trying things out.
I've been involved with the indie film industry. I've been involved, I'm a self published author as well. So I know a bit about the book publishing industry too. However, I'm not really familiar with the process of publishing games. So, can you walk our audience through what's it like, or how do you go about publishing a game, or how do you approach a game publisher?
That's an interesting question. Again, I'm personally still trying to figure this out. This is a work in progress. It's not like something that I'm expert at. But in general, I would say that one of the first things that it's also kind of ironic is that to gain the interest of a game company, you have to show them that the game is worth selling, basically. Like if if you want help to sell your game, you kind of need to sell the game to someone else. So one thing that really helps in that regard is, from what I've heard, is getting positive feedback on the game and people that may recommend the game to others. That shows companies that, hey, there is actually a public interested in this title. Another thing is that you usually have to make a pitch deck. A pitch deck is basically a document that highlights what your product is and what you're asking for the company that's going to help you. For example, you want to explain to the game, okay, Aerostrike is a combination of Metroidvania, bullet hell, and shoot 'em ups. Its target audience is between so much and so much, and its features are that it's on PC, it has so much controls, it has so many levels, it lasts this long. And what I'm asking for is, for example, a little bit of extra money for funding and to finish the game, and help in marketing and publishing on X or Y platform. After that, you go around seeing different game publishers that may be interested in your product. Usually, you want to find someone that lines up with your product and what you want. You're not gonna approach a mobile game publisher for a PC only game. You're not gonna try to sell a single player game to a company that focuses primarily on multiplayer games, stuff like that. And you contact them. Each company has different ways to contact them. Sometimes you have to send an email to a certain address. Sometimes they have a form inside their website, or maybe just a message board where you just post, hey, I want to pitch my game.
I want to ask, what advice could you offer a developer working on their first game?
What advice I could offer? I would say learn to take feedback. I've seen a lot of people where they get told something and they, instead of trying to analyze what they're told, they kind of try to defend their own vision. I've done it myself. But to truly grow as a game developer is to understand what someone really means when they say something to you. Like, for example, if someone tells me that they don't like the combat, it may be that maybe the enemies are not fun enough to fight, or maybe the controls are not tight enough and they feel a little bit sloppy. And you have to basically take what they say and analyze through it, even if it's really hurtful. One of the best feedback I ever got for Aerostrike came from someone that was, let's be honest, he was really mean to me. He basically mocked me at one point. But at the end of the day, he really gave me some really solid and strong things to work with. One example being the weapon overheat mechanic. I originally wanted the player to just hold the trigger as long as they wanted, but he, in his own way, he told me that the game needed a little bit more something for the shooting, and something to keep the player's mind a little bit more active during combat instead of just holding down the trigger. And one option was the overheat mechanic. where you hold the trigger for a little bit too long and then the gun starts to jam and shoot slower. I started working with that, and as as I tried it, in the long run, it turned out to be a really interesting mechanic that keeps people a little bit more attentive than they would otherwise be of the game. Gives them something else to think about, something to keep in mind, and it in turn actually makes the fighting a little bit more fun when you have to keep that in mind that you cannot hold the trigger forever.
I do think it is a rather nice touch, and one thing that I really think differentiates it from other or shoot 'em ups, I would say. In most shoot 'em up games, you can pretty much just press the your main your main gun, or use your main gun as much as you want to without any consequences. And here, the overheat mechanic kind of makes you rethink that. Okay, you can't go in and just keep your button, your finger on the trigger button the whole time and hope for the best. You actually have to plan out, because if your gun overheats, then you're gonna have a bad time. So I think that is a rather nice touch. I do say this as a content creator. Learning to take criticism is a big, is a challenge. Is a challenge for us as well. It's something that I think anybody can learn, but it's something that has to be learned, especially in today's world. Many people, they see any type of criticism as being hate, for example. And to be fair, there is a lot of hate out there, and so it does take a bit of wisdom to know, okay, somebody, being honest, and somebody, just being a dick. And I don't think I'm in a position to offer any wisdom on how to differentiate between the two, but I do think it is a good skill to have.
Yeah, back when I worked in my StarCraft 2 mod, Aerostrike Rebirth, I remember the first time I showed the mod to someone, they immediately told me, "Hey, look, buddy, this thing you made, it kinda sucks really bad. But don't be discouraged by what I told you. Use that to make this worth something." And since then, I've taken that to heart, and I've slowly tried to make myself be able to take feedback, take criticism, and work with it.
And I think that's, as both game developers and content creators, that's a very fundamental skill to have. To be able to pick up on that, to use it to our advantage, and to actually, to help us to improve ourselves. I have one final question, one final specific question I want to ask. And I'm really excited to ask you about this one because, at least when I look at your games that you have on itch.io, all your games, Goldbash, Attrition, Aerostrike, they're all very different from each other. So I want to ask, what does the future look like for LMG?
I'm gonna be honest, I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm trying to make the game dev thing work. If I can make it work, then I will continue making games as much as I do right now. If not, I may actually have to think of alternatives, but I may still be able to make games though at a slower pace than what I am right now. So yeah, I guess you can ask me that again in a couple of months and we'll see where I stand.
Do you have any ideas for any future projects?
Personally, I really want to be able to make like a Aerostrike trilogy. Like, I have this whole idea in my mind of a sequel for the game and then one final game where both previous games kind of take a little bit of a center stage and clash together, basically. But instead of that, I'm not 100% sure, honestly.
All right. Now I want to turn the mic over to you and ask if you have any questions for me.
Good question. Now that I just say that, keeping to the theme of Aerostrike, what would you think that might be the thing that you might not have liked the most in the game?
Well, for me, it's just the controls. The controls, and you said you're working on that. You're working on it. Mapping out a controller support. And so for me, I'll be honest with you. I've never really played a game that uses both a keyboard and a mouse simultaneously in the way that Aerostrike does. And so I won't say it's specifically your game. So I won't say that. But that's probably more of a mic issue. So it took some getting used to, but once I got into it, I found the controls to be, to be pretty straightforward. Though I would say that having controller support would definitely, I think, I think would add a lot of accessibility to it. Because I'm not sure how common my views are or how common my situation is. But I feel like there's at least some people out there, at least when I look through, game jams and when I look through, online events like Sage or Nintendo Galaxy Fan Game Community Expo, I see a lot of comments, where people say, oh, why is there no controller support? And so I think that could make the game much more accessible, I would say. But I didn't really want to talk too much about that because, again, I feel like that's more of a mic issue as opposed to, an Aerostrike issue. And I want to be fair.
That's not like criticism. It's not that I don't want to add that. It's simply that it takes a while to do that.
Well, and I completely understand. And I completely understand. And, and I think most people would understand that coming into this game. Most fair-minded people would understand that, And I think, the fact that you want to implement that, really means a lot to a lot of people. Honestly, I don't really have. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much the one really big thing, actually, I have. I'll also just point out again that the game just does so many good things. The music, the mechanics, and I can't emphasize enough just how fun I found the strategic gameplay, hiding behind terrain and firing at your enemies. I'll be honest with you, I've missed out on a lot of modern games. I didn't really get back into gaming until maybe summer 2020, fall 2020. So I missed a lot, and I still am missing out on a lot of modern games, modern shooters like Call of Duty, or Warzone, or even battle royale games like, for example, like Fortnite. So for me to play a game like this, it really shows me that, yeah, you know what, I think, I would like a game, a more strategy-based shooting game, such as those titles I mentioned. So I think, your game does a lot of things really well. And also the music too. I mentioned this before, but the music is definitely a big plus. Music, I find, when it comes to games, when it comes to movies, is one of the key things that can either make or break an experience. And music is very critical. And I'll give you an example. It's a bit of a silly example, but I think it illustrates this point well. So imagine you see an action-packed movie, or let's say something like The Terminator or The Punisher, and there's a scene, with a lot of gunfighting in it. So imagine, instead of something like death metal or something like Rob Zombie or Metallica playing, you have something like, say, Britney Spears or something like Pop Goes the Weasel playing. It's going to throw the whole mood of that scene off. But likewise, if you can get the music just right on the same vibe as what you're going for with the visuals or the gameplay in regards to a video game, then I think that's going to make that experience so much more memorable. And your game does just that. I remember playing through the first level, when you get past the training and something's going wrong with the training simulation, so you have all these ships coming at you, and it's no longer a simulation, but it's for real. And the music there, it's I can feel my heart race as I'm like, okay, what's going on now? What's going to happen now? And the music adds to that, I think. I'll also say the visuals as well. The visuals I find to be... I'm a huge 2D gamer. So for me, don't get me wrong, I do like some 3D games as well. But I really love 2D games. And I love how the main sprite, the ship, and the enemy ships, they kind of have... I'm not sure the correct term to use here. They they're 2D, or maybe they kind of have like a 3D-ish look to them, but they're 2D, but they're set on the background of, a 2D They set on a 2D background, and I love that contrast there. I really love it. And the ships, they kind of have a really unique color, and there's so many gameplay mechanics as well. There's a whole issue with the shields, the guns overheating, and so much more. I would say, I think you have something magic on your hands. I played for a lot of shooters. I played for a lot of space shooters in the indie game scene. For some reason, I've never quite figured this out, but I find that it's a very popular genre in the indie game scene. But I would definitely say, Aerostrike is one of the standout titles in that situation.
A little fun fact about that song you mentioned in the training room. That song I ended up calling Flight of the Aerostrike. Partly because I figured like it's the first song you hear when you start up the game, and it's the first big fight song you hear, and it's also the first boss music you hear. So I kinda wanted to give it like that little extra upbeat feel of the name. Kinda like you're finally setting free, getting off into your own adventure.
I get that feel. I get that intense feeling from it as well. So I say, as a composer, you did a phenomenal job. A phenomenal job. And you have any more questions for me? And I would say nothing is off the table here. Feel free to ask me anything. Nothing's off the table as long as we're not doxing ourselves. And nothing is off the table.
Okay, there's something that has actually been bothering me for a while. How did you get that promo code name?
Oh, well, honestly, so I was just approached by Poggers. I want to say either late Friday night, early Saturday morning, and so they sent me a form to fill out, and so they asked me to choose it, so I chose it myself. My fandom is kind of divided over who I am exactly, and it's my fault. It's my fault about this. So when I first started to be a content creator, or on my path to be a VTuber, I wanted my character to be as close to me as possible, but kind of like an anime form, because that's really the biggest VTuber aesthetic is anime. Now you can find other types of VTubers like refrigerators, animals, other animation styles, but anime, the anime-esque style is the biggest. And I wanted to really reflect who I am, what I am to. I'm really much into ska punk as a music genre as well. And then I want to say about maybe last December, somewhere along the lines of maybe early January or February, I met an amazing group of people who are now very close friends, almost like a family to me. I refer to them as the Bird Cult. And we are a group of people with mostly geese and ducks as our profile picture, though there are some others like quails and swans, and even a rat enthusiast as well. And so in order to join them, I decided, okay, I'm gonna commission some artwork. And so I gave my artist Fran, who's a phenomenal artist, by the way, I gave her I gave her a picture of a cartoon duck, and it's from a Canadian cartoon called Sitting Ducks. It was a really interesting show. Well, a show I really enjoyed, I would say. A lot of people didn't like it, but it's kind of my comfort show, but that's beside the point. And so she took it and she used that as kind of like the base to make my my current Twitter profile picture. But I'd spent so many months up until that point, building up my identity on YouTube, and I didn't want to change completely. So I left my YouTube identity and my Twitch identity, the anime profile picture guy, anime ska punk Big Mike. But on Twitter, I decided to be this waterfowl character. Same Big Mike, same outfit almost, but just a waterfowl. However, on Twitter, some of my fans started calling me Duck Daddy. Some of my fans started calling me Goose Daddy. And so there's some debate on, is he an anime guy? Is he a duck? Is he a goose? And to that, I usually just respond, yes, I am. But ultimately, I went with Duck Daddy just because of the alliteration. I figured it'd make it more memorable. as opposed to say Goose Daddy. Though in the bird cult I identify as a goose. So, but any of my fans want to call me Duck Daddy, yeah, I accept that as well. So that's kind of a long and strange story, but that's why I went with a promo code Duck Daddy.
That's a pretty good story, not gonna lie. I think that's the last question I have for you right now.
I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much. So hang around. I got to close this out, and I want you to hang around for a bit, and I'll talk to you for a bit afterwards, okay? Thank you so much, LMG, for all of your support and for joining us today. Alright, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and waterfowls, thank you so much for joining us as well. Be sure to check out Aerostrike at the link below. And if you can't buy it, then try out the demo. Trying out demos are a great way to support indie game developers. Now, also, if you really like my channel and you'd like to support my content, please consider donating to my Ko-fi. For the time being, anything I receive via Ko-fi will go towards building my dream PC and towards becoming a VTuber. Also, a special thanks to Fran, who does a wonderful job doing my art. A special thanks to all of my friends on Twitter. I wouldn't be here without you all. And most importantly, a special thanks to all of you for watching. Please like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you dislike it. Feel free to comment below and let me know what you think. And if you like my content, please subscribe and turn your notifications on. Until next time, fam, remember, just be yourself and you'll be awesome. Peace out!